We're good to go. I guess we're good to go. We'll probably. Hi everyone. We're just going to give things a few minutes for people to kind of settle in and trickle in. But thank you so much for coming. Yeah, give it 5. Definitely good. Wait for Sheila to come. Yeah, we'll wait for Sheila to arrive. I think that's a good idea. That's why they. Yeah. Yes. We're waiting for the artist to arrive as well. She should be on her way. On her way from stage left. They're on their way. Oh, good. There's a bunch of people in the gap. To get started, My name is Blair Fornwald, and I'm the director curator at the School of Art Gallery. And on behalf of the gallery, I am so pleased to welcome you all to this evening's panel discussion, held in celebration of Sheila Butler's beautiful exhibition, Other Circumstances, a focused retrospective of the artist's powerful paintings and works on paper, co-curated by Pamela Edmonds and Patrick Mann. Sheila is a national treasure who has for many years called Winnipeg her home, and we are so honored to host this beautiful and important exhibition here at the University of Manitoba, where Sheila taught for many years, and in this city, which has benefited so much from her work and her community engagement. I hope you're all going to join us upstairs after the talk for the reception of opening circumstances right after this panel. Before I introduce the artist and tonight's presenters, I want to acknowledge that we are on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Ininewek, the Anishinaabe, the Dakota Ayote, and the Dene people, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. Our presence here is sustained by drinking water from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, and we receive our electricity generated by the Nelson River on Tatasquiac, Fox Lake, York Factory, and War Lake First Nations. The city of Winnipeg takes its name from the Anishinaabe and Ininewek name Winnipi, or Muddy Water, and it is located here on the junctions of the Red and Assiniboine rivers, a site that has served as a meeting place for over 6,000 years. In 1871, Treaty 1 was signed here at Lower Fort Garry, taking land from 7 First Nations and making it available for settler use and ownership. It should be noted, however, that the land, water, and resources were not ceded, that First Nations signatories signed this agreement in the spirit of peace and friendship, offering to share the land, water, and resources for the mutual benefit of all. And yet with each wave of settlement displaced Indigenous peoples from their traditional lands and ways of life. The Indian Act of 1876 stripped Indigenous people of their rights and liberties, separating families vis-a-vis the residential school system, and severing Indigenous people's connections to their land and culture. We acknowledge that not only have Indigenous people faced historic oppression, they continue to experience harm through deeply rooted and widespread colonialist systems and ideologies that impact all facets of our contemporary life. Today, Winnipeg is a richly multicultural city, one with the largest Indigenous community in Canada per capita. It's home to settlers and immigrants who have made their way here either in this generation or in generations past, often escaping their own persecution and oppression, as well as the descendants of African ancestors who arrived here on Turtle Island involuntarily. Now, Tagalog is the third most common spoken language, and 35% of Winnipeggers identify as members of a visible minority. Reconciliation and decolonization efforts benefit us all, creating a culture of racial, gender, and class equality, good environmental stewardship, safety, care, and respect. As a settler descendant and a representative of an artistic and educational institution, it is a tremendous privilege to live and work here alongside my Indigenous colleagues, friends, and community members in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So I am personally and institutionally very grateful. I also want to take a moment to thank the people and the organizations who have made this presentation and exhibition possible. First and foremost, to acknowledge the generous support of the University of Manitoba and the School of Art's fantastic faculty, staff, donors, and volunteers who support the gallery's programming. Thank you also to the Government of Canada for financial support, and to our lovely colleagues at MAWA, Mentoring Artists for Women's Art, who are co-presenters of this evening's presentation and also an upcoming feminist figure drawing event that's inspired by Sheila's work and held in conjunction with this exhibition. I also want to acknowledge the tremendous support that we've received from Museum London and Arts and Humanities at Western University, who presented an earlier iteration of this exhibition in 2021 at London, Ontario's Satellite Gallery. This exhibition is accompanied by a beautiful catalog published by Museum London and Western's Art and Humanities, and you can purchase it upstairs. It features texts by co-curators Patrick Mahon and Pamela Edmonds, as well as texts by independent curator David Liss, artists Ed Pien and Julie Voice, and an interview with Sheila conducted by curator Sarah Charette. I also want to thank our lenders, including the Macintosh Gallery, Museum London, and the Winnipeg Art Gallery, as well as the Woodstock Art Gallery. So thank you so much for trusting us and cooperating with us to present this show. We are also incredibly grateful for the collaboration and support of the artists, curators, and academics who regularly entrust the School of Art Gallery to share their work, their research, and their stories with our students, faculty, staff, and community members. Today, I want to extend my sincere gratitude to Sheila, as well as to the exhibition co-curators, Patrick and Pamela, and to my colleague, Suzie Smith, who was one of the co-curators of Sheila Butler's exhibition on a continuous role, part 1, at Martha Street Studio in 2014. So yeah, personally, I moved to Winnipeg in 2020, and I think hosting a retrospective of Sheila's work was always a top priority of mine, so I was really, really, truly delighted when Patrick reached out to me to see if we were interested in presenting this exhibition here. I'm going to introduce Sheila, and then I will introduce each of tonight's presenters, and then the three of them will give their presentations. Then after that, we'll open it up to a conversation, and we'll have time for audience questions at the end. And if you're joining us on live stream, hello, thank you for coming virtually. And you can use the chat function in YouTube. You can leave your questions there, and my lovely colleague Dee will relay them to our presenters. All right, on to Sheila. I hope I do you justice. Sheila Butler was born near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and was educated at Carnegie Mellon University. She immigrated to Canada in 1962, and as many of you know, she lived and worked in Winnipeg for, I think, 20 years. Teaching studio courses at the University of Manitoba and art history courses at the University of Winnipeg. In 1989, she began a teaching position at Western University in London, Ontario, where she was a really important influence on the development of the department, including its graduate programs. In 1993, she obtained a master's degree in theory and criticism from Western, and her thesis work was a psychoanalytic analysis of the work of feminist and surrealist artist Merritt Oppenheim. After living in Toronto for many years, she has since returned to the prairies, is living in Winnipeg. Her work has been widely exhibited in Canada and beyond, and it is found in many private, corporate, and public collections, including the National Gallery of Canada and the Winnipeg Art Gallery. Activism and community engagement has always been a really important part of Sheila's practice. In the 1960s, along with her former husband, Jack Butler, and a group of Inuit artists, they co-founded the Sanivic Arctic Cooperative, in Baker Lake, Nunavut. And then together with artists Ruby Arnagak, Jack Butler, Patrick Mann, and William Noah, Butler worked on the Art and Coal Cash Collective, investigating discourses surrounding money and capitalism in Baker Lake and other northern communities, a multidisciplinary research project that took place from 2004 to 2007. And she is, as many of you might know, one of the co-founders of MAWA, Mentoring Artists for Women's Art, which just celebrated its 40th anniversary, I think 2 weeks ago, and is really an amazing keystone in Winnipeg's feminist art community, which has really fostered the development and promoted the work of women and gender diverse artists throughout Manitoba and well beyond. Sheila's longtime friend and fellow painter, Diane Whitehouse, MAWA's other co-founder, notes that women artists had few opportunities in Winnipeg in the late 1970s. She writes, "There was a perception that plug-in was inaccessible to local women artists, and it seemed virtually impossible for women to secure tenured faculty positions at the School of Art. There were more women than men graduating from art school, but somehow the women seemed to disappear from the scene right after graduation. The situation prompted the question, is this as good as it gets? for women. As a plug-in board member and an activist, and also as a member of a working class family who had been involved in labor organizing and unions, White House started thinking about developing a mentorship program that could support women artists at various stages in their career. She also writes, I can't remember exactly when I approached Sheila about working on this project, but it must have been sometime in the early 80s. Sheila, who was teaching as a sessional instructor at the School of Art, came from an American working class, pro-union background, and we were friends and colleagues. I would say that MAWA emerged when it did because the time was right politically and because the right mix of people came together locally. There was a good chemistry between Sheila and me, partly because of our shared working class background, and because we both faced the intensely frustrating issues of gender equality with a sense of humor and a genuine belief in the possibility of affecting social change. This group secured funds for the mentorship initiative, which was initially run as a plug-in program under the directorship of John Tupper and program administrator Andrea Phillip. Diane notes that their initial plan was quite modest. Their aim was to keep the program running for a few years and to identify enough interested senior women artists to serve as mentors for emerging women artists for that duration. 40 years later, the organization remains incredibly vital, growing and changing, to respond to the community need and to the ever-evolving and expanding discourses of art, feminism, gender, and intersectional politics. As one of MAWA's former mentors and a presenter who was a visiting curator there, and also as a current board member and collaborator, I just really want to extend some personal gratitude and to the work that Sheila, Diane, and all of their co-conspirators have done for their vision, for their hard work that has built such a strong, resilient, and enduring feminist art community in Winnipeg. It's really, truly anchored by MAWA and its foundation mentorship programs. Okay, so thank you. So our first presenter of this evening is my colleague, Suzie Smith, who's an associate professor here at the School of Art. Suzie is an artist who works with printmaking and design that expands into sculpture, installation, and video. Her work incorporates the deconstruction and transformation of objects and materials to uncover new and multiple meanings. Rooted in an interest in material construction and pattern making, she creates systems and structures for her processes that act as a tool to build, take apart, and push against. Suzie's work has been presented in solo exhibitions and group exhibitions in Canada, the United States, and Europe. She has created commissioned installations with Plug-in ICA for the Centennial Concert Hall, for the New Music Festival, and at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami, Florida, with Ulite Arts. Her works are held in several public and private collections, including the BMO Financial Group Corporate Art Collection, the TD Bank Corporate Art Collection, and the Province of Manitoba Government Art Collection. She received her BFA from Concordia University and her MFA from the Glasgow School of Art. In addition to her own practice, she is a founding member of Parameter Press and a regular visual arts collaborator with Weather Parade Prairie Dance Theatre. I made up that name a little. With Weather Parade Dance Theatre. She was also the former professional programming coordinator at Martha Street Studios, where in 2014, she and former director Larry Glosson hosted the exhibition Sheila Butler on a Continuous Role, Part 1, which she will be speaking about this evening. As the title would suggest, On a Continuous Role, Part 1 was intended to be a companion to a concurrent painting and drawing retrospective of works on a Continuous Role, Part 2, which was to be held at the School of Art Gallery and curated by then director-curator Mary Reed. Amidst other challenges, Reed's departure to be the director at the Woodstock Art Gallery curtailed this exhibition, and so it was really important to me when I assumed the position of director-curator that we would host a retrospective of Sheila's work. And so, yeah, it was really great when Patrick reached out and to offer to see if we were interested in hosting Other Circumstances, this beautiful show that he had co-curated with Pamela Edmonds. I've known Patrick for many years, since my days as a grad student at Western University, and so it's been a real privilege and joy to work with you in this capacity. Patrick Mahon is an artist, writer, and curator, as well as a professor emeritus in visual arts at Western University in London. Born in Winnipeg, he received his BFA at the School of Art here in 1979, and he has exhibited nationally and internationally, including recent solo exhibitions at the Thames New Art Gallery in Chatham, and in the group exhibition Written on the Earth, curated by Helen Gregory at the Macintosh Art Gallery. The project Garden Ship and State, which was co-curated by Patrick along with Jeff Thomas for Museum London 2021, was a really ambitious 3-year project that was one of 2 finalists for Galleries Ontario's 2022 Exhibition of the Year, and it will be presented at the Thames Art Gallery in late 2024. Pretty soon. Mahon's work is included in numerous public, private, and corporate collections. Our final presenter tonight will be Pamela Edmonds, the other co-curator of Other Circumstances. Pamela is the curator of contemporary art and the current director and curator at the Dalhousie Art Gallery in Halifax. She holds a BFA in studio art and art history and an MA in art history from Concordia University in Montreal. Edmonds' research interests focus on Canadian art and the politics of representation. And her work has developed by looking at curating as a form of social practice, linked to different relationships between people and objects, as well as to wider social structures and contexts. Many of her projects explore the impact of Black diasporic cultures on the evolving geography of global contemporary art. She began her curatorial career in Halifax in the late 1990s, holding programming roles at the Anna Leonowens Gallery at NASCAD, at Mount St. Vincent's University and Art Gallery, and at the Centre for Art Tapes, to name a few. She has also held curatorial positions in Ontario, including at A Space Gallery, the Art Gallery of Peterborough, the Thames Art Gallery, and the McMaster Museum of Art. Besides authoring numerous exhibitions, publications, she has also written for Canadian Art, Prefix Photo, Arts Atlantic, Mice, and Rakar, and she has served on the advisory boards of C Magazine, Canadian Art, and the Art Museum at the University of Toronto, as well as cultural pluralism in the arts movement Ontario. That's a mouthful. So thank you so much to all of you for being here, and thank you so much to Sheila, Suzie, Patrick, and Pamela for your trust, support, and for your upcoming words. So yeah, thank you. I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Suzie Smith.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good crowd. Okay. Hopefully it's not too redundant on some of the things, but I'll just proceed. I wanted to start by saying thank you to Blair Fornwald and the team here at the School of Art Gallery for inviting me to be a part of this panel and for making this exhibition happen. I'm honored to sit alongside Pamela Edmonds and Patrick Mahon, the co-curators of this exhibition, who put together this amazing and thoughtful show. And of course, thank you to Sheila, whose remarkable work and art career is the reason we're all here. I feel like my role here is to speak to Sheila's print-based work, which is a big part of her practice, but not as much in the exhibition upstairs. And as someone that teaches here at the School of Art, I'll speak a little to her role as a teacher and mentor, which I feel I've incredibly benefited from over the years. So this first image is the title wall from her exhibition at Martha Street Studio. And I feel like this exhibition in the gallery here, Other Circumstances, is coming full circle. In 2014, I was the professional programming coordinator at Martha Street Studio, where we hosted a retrospective exhibition of Sheila's print-based work titled On a Continuous Role, Part 1. It came about through Mary Reid, who was the curator here at the University of Manitoba's, at the time, new School of Art Gallery. Her idea was to have a retrospective of Sheila's print work at Martha Street around the same time as a larger retrospective of her painting and drawings here. Both lined up with the year of MAWA Mentoring Artists for Women's Art's 30th year anniversary, so almost exactly 10 years ago. Due to a few reasons, the show didn't happen at the time, but the print show did continue as planned, hence why it was called On a Continuous Roll Part 1, perhaps to encourage the Part 2 to still happen, which great it did. So since I'm listed as the curator, I want to mention that I had never curated an exhibition like this before, and I was very much supported in this role by Mary Reed, then by Larry Glosson, who was the executive director at Martha Street, and also by Sheila herself, who always brings with her a strong vision and mentorship to everything she does. This is the image from the exhibition brochure featuring the serigraph Three Swimmers. The exhibition featured work gathered from a number of collections, including the University of Winnipeg, the University of Manitoba, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, the Province of Manitoba Government Collection, as well as other private collections and the artist's personal collection. I think it really spoke to the breadth of Sheila's work over time. The exhibition spanned work from over 40 years and included prints in a variety of techniques, including lithography, intaglio, screen print or serigraphy, and relief print. A little bit about Sheila's print history. Growing up in Pennsylvania, she earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with honors from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in 1960. There she had rigorous training that included printmaking. She moved to Canada in 1962, and in the late 60s, she and her former husband moved to Baker Lake, Nunavut. Together, they worked on a printmaking initiative that engaged and supported Inuit artists in the community. Eventually, they founded Sanavik Cooperative with local artists. Sheila holds great admiration for many of the artists in Baker Lake and made long-term connections with some of the artists in the community, particularly the women artists, such as Ruby Arnanak. She collaborated on exhibitions and projects and would host some of these artists when they came to town after she'd moved to Winnipeg. Though she and her former husband were coordinating the project and provided instruction for techniques in this initiative, I can clearly see the influence went both ways in the work. I see a lasting influence in Sheila's work, particularly in her prints, both formally through her use of negative space and perspective, and in the way she approaches creating narrative. Though she's typically referred to as a painter or drawer, she's also a very accomplished printmaker. Her printed works demonstrate a real ease with the techniques, where the process isn't taking over the conversation from the content. There's a fluidity in her practice that carried over between different media and techniques. Something I find interesting is how the language of print transitions into her paintings. Things like layering, flatness, working in series that are all inherent in the print process are also things that you see in her paintings. When working in prints, artists are often limited to the size of the equipment, the paper, or limitations of one's own physical body. For example, how big a squeegee you can pull with your arm strength. To make something large, you often need to work in panels or sections that later get pieced together. This is evident in pieces like Figure Intent or Diver, where you can see the seam lines of where the paper is pieced together. It is also present in some of her painted works, where this likely wouldn't be necessary, such as the diptych, bearing in mind You Could Die Today, which is in the show upstairs. This multi-panel approach becomes part of her work separate from print process and conjures up references to comic books or film, and in general, movement captured through still images. For example, you can see in this work Diver that it was made in two pieces fastened together. I've also seen an image online where this piece was framed differently, where the two pieces were framed separately, then displayed together, allowing the space or gutter between to become part of the image. Around the same time of the exhibition at Martha Street, Sheila worked with printmaking technician Peter Graham to create a studio edition during a month-long residency at Martha Street. It was great to see a little glimpse into Sheila's way of working. It made an impression on me. She's a force. In this piece, she continued to work on themes of water and swimming and a kind of in-between state of being, using the distortion and ripples evident when looking through water. I remember her being decisive and organized with a clear vision from the start. I have a particular memory of when it came to numbering and signing the work that Peter needed to go back and make more, because she wanted to make sure there was a full numbered edition, plus an artist's proof, a printer's proof for Peter, studio proof for Martha Street, and a fundraising proof for MAWA's annual fundraising event. Though she worked hard and wanted things to be the best they could be, she also wanted to make sure that all the different people that contributed were considered in a concrete and professional way. This idea of community and care are things we talk a lot about now these days, but I think Sheila has always been thinking about this in her work all along. This glimpse into how she worked with individual artists pointed to a larger way she saw the art-making process. For the exhibition brochure from this show, I interviewed her for the text. When asked about intention with her work, she offered this quote: "I don't think of art primarily as an individual experience. I think of art as a committee project over centuries, and I'm much more interested in large art movements than I am of any individual artist, including myself. So I'm interested in how I fit into a trail that an anonymous monk experienced in the year 900, then how that trail developed through Europe until I inherited certain traditions as a child in Pittsburgh. But the idea of individual genius, I think is untrue. I don't think that it's interesting, and I don't think that's the way it works. But I'm very, very interested in how I can be part of a cultural pattern that continues over thousands of years." As someone who teaches here at the school, I also wanted to use the opportunity to talk about Sheila's long-term connection with many of her students and her lasting impact in the Winnipeg arts community. Sheila taught for 16 years as a sessional instructor in studio art here at the School of Art and in art history at the University of Winnipeg before moving to London, Ontario to teach at Western. She taught there for an additional 15 years as a full professor. She still has close relationships and has collaborated with many past students, some that are present here in the audience today, probably many that are present here today, actually. Many speak to the work ethic she instilled in them and mentioned how they can still hear her voice in their head when they make artistic decisions. While Sheila was at the School of Art, there was almost no permanent female or gender diverse or racially diverse professors, and this is something she and her peers fought against. This and other factors led to initiatives to try and unionize sessional staff and to the creation of MAWA, Mentoring Artists for Women's Art. MAWA was first started by Diane Whitehouse as a small working group out of Plug-in, with Sheila joining early on. They started MAWA to encourage and support the intellectual and creative development of women in the visual arts. Sheila contributed in a number of ways, particularly in the mentorship role. Since it was started, the program has since nurtured the careers of more than 400 artists, including myself as well. Though she was in London, Ontario for many years, then in Toronto, she was also an ongoing participant of an annual art camp for instructors started by Diane Whitehouse in Riding Mountain National Park in connection with Arts West that was attended by a regular group of established artists for a week every spring, also many in the group as well. Sheila and Diane participated from 2003 until the pandemic, when the new challenges emerged and the hill up to the cabins became more of a challenge. In the years she attended, Sheila would take the Greyhound bus from Toronto every year to reconnect with this group, make art, and continue conversations. It continues now and is run by Diana Thornycroft. I was very touched in hearing about the long-term connections with students, friends, and peers. It seems like in most cases, these lines eventually blur. I will wrap it up there. Thanks again to Sheila for your contribution as an accomplished artist and for your advocacy within the arts. Thank you. Do I need to X out of it?
Have to excuse me while I deal with technology. Oops. Good evening. So nice to see all of you and to see many good, and I don't want to call you old friends, but many friends. It's a great honor as one of the co-curators of Other Circumstances alongside Pamela Edmonds to be with you tonight. And I first want to thank Blair Fornwalt for her kind introduction and all the great work that she's done with us to make this happen. Suzie Smith for her wonderful talk. Relating to the printmaking exhibition at Martha Street Studio mentioned in 2014. Before going any further, I also want to thank others on the team here at the School of Art Gallery, Donna Jones, Glenn Johnson, C.W. Brooks, Dee Barcy, and others on the team at the school who've worked so diligently and caringly to realize the exhibition. There's so much that could be said, and some of it has been said about the development of the project, and I won't be too redundant, but there will be a few redundancies. And about the many folks in Winnipeg, Ontario, and elsewhere in Canada who took an interest in ensuring that Sheila Butler's work would receive the attention it so richly deserves. Among them, as mentioned, former director-curator at the School of Art Gallery, Mary Reid, was a champion who continued to take an interest in the project, including by lending a couple of works from the collection at the Woodstock Art Gallery to this exhibition. So we have a full slate this evening, and so therefore I'm going to jump to the year 2019, and this will be a little bit repetitive, but it'll be my version of how this came together. Sheila, I should say, I and a group of colleagues who are Sheila's former students and some museum-based supporters decided we couldn't wait any longer before we would all get to see a selection of Sheila's works in drawing and painting in the light of a gallery. Those people include the writers for the publication mentioned, Ed Pean and Julie Boyce, curator David Liss, and Sarah Charette, an emerging curator, as well as director of Museum London at the time, Brian Meehan, and head of collections and programs, Andrew Keir at Museum London, who many of you know from his years at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And as mentioned, Larry Glosson, Diane Whitehouse, Suzie Smith, and many others here in Winnipeg were also interested and supportive of the project. And we truly appreciate the loan of works from the Winnipeg Art Gallery that allowed us to expand this exhibition. I've mentioned Pamela Edmonds already, and as co-curator of the exhibition, I've really enjoyed working with her gracious and skilled contributions and collaborations, and I thank her warmly for the privilege and pleasure of working together. Pamela had, as mentioned by others in the past, supported Sheila's work, and that included a significant show with the young artist Lucy Chan in 2007 at the Art Gallery of Peterborough. Her recognition of Sheila's importance as an artist and a contributor of depth and critical insight to art in Canada was, for me, key validation to this initiative to realize a focused retrospective. I note that its first presentation, or the first presentation that we had in London, Ontario, was quite modest at Satellite Gallery, and it was also during COVID, so I could count on two hands the number of people who actually got in the door. So it's indeed being presented in a much more worthy setting here at the School of Art, and we're very appreciative of it. The title of the exhibition was lifted out from a sentence in Pamela's essay in our publication, which was produced, as mentioned, by Museum London. In my own afterword in the book, I referred to reading Pamela's essay aloud for the first time, sitting alongside Sheila at her yellow kitchen table in downtown Toronto in early 2021. I recall marveling then, as I do now, at Pamela's observations, including that Sheila's figures are often positioned to take on a hero's journey, many times passing through visual chaos, yet finding tools and necessary means to cross into other circumstances or conditions. That phrase, other circumstances, is for me a perfect way of encapsulating the experience of encountering Sheila's complex and glowing canvases, and perhaps by association, speculating on her motivations as a maker of pictures. Her works present us with zones that, while not truly unfamiliar, are representative of the kinds of othernesses we inhabit when we find ourselves in and out of place, sometimes, of course, at the same time. Drink water, excuse me. It's fair to say that I've known Sheila personally for longer than the majority of people in my life today, except for some school friends and my extended family. Even my wonderful wife, Barb, has only been around for 40 years. I was 19 years old in 1976 when Sheila was my first-year drawing teacher here at the University of Manitoba. After that, she was something of a mentor for me as an artist in my 20s and early 30s, including when Barb and I were working as teachers for a couple of years in the Keewatin region of what was then the Northwest Territories. Remarkably, after several years of sporadic contact between Sheila and me, in the late 80s and early 90s, our paths crossed again, rather significantly, when Barb and I moved east from Victoria, BC, and Sheila became my colleague in visual arts at the University of Western Ontario in 1995. Teaching alongside Sheila was a fantastic opportunity. And I would say that along with her wealth of art knowledge and her keen intellect, her sense of humor, which could have its grim side, was a bomb. I recall we were co-teaching the fourth-year students one year, and late in the second term, both of us were bemoaning the lack of work that looked at all ready for a final exhibition. Sheila turned to me and said, "I feel like we're all on a plane together, and it's going down, and I'm the only one who knows about it." Sorry, how do I? Great. Okay. After Sheila retired from Western in 2004, we became collaborators, as mentioned, on various projects, including significantly Art and Cold Catch, from approximately 2004 to 2011. It was a group undertaking involving Indigenous artists from the territory now called Nunavut, and a handful of Southern Canadian artists who had previously lived in the North for an extended period of time. The project, as mentioned, took a critical look at the simultaneous introduction of capitalist exchange and art production projects in communities in the North in the mid to late 20th century. Through that work with Sheila, along with her then husband, Jack Butler, and our shared creative production and friendships with Baker Lake collaborators Ruby Arnuknuk and William Noah, who have both passed now, and later through Sheila's and my shared interest in our respective lives as artists and family people, we developed a remarkable bond, and I'm truly grateful for it. So, in toto, I've come to know Sheila as an artist, a teacher, a collaborator, an activist, and someone with a great mind, who also has loved to watch the Pittsburgh Steelers on TV for pleasure and relaxation. And I know that for a fact. One of the questions I've asked myself, and this goes to a little bit of what Suzie was talking about, is how Sheila has managed to do all of these things so well, with such character and intelligence, and to have evolved the capacity to pursue so many meaningful things with integration and purpose. Oh, sorry. Wrong thing to do. I've often thought of Sheila's practices, her various commitments, large and small, as somehow continuous with one another in ways that suggest they have a sense of common purpose. Speaking as an artist, I can tell you how I think about purpose. I don't set an objective goal for myself, though sometimes I wish I did, nor do I have a 5-year plan involving benchmarks or milestones. There is no plan. But I do have intention. I do have intention. Of course, that's something that we hear about in many sectors these days. For most artists, intention has a particular cast. In that regard, there's a recent book entitled The Creative Act by music producer Rick Rubin, which includes the following thoughts, and this is a quote. "An intention is more than a conscious purpose. It's the congruence of a purpose which requires an alignment of all aspects of oneself, of conscious thought and unconscious beliefs, of capabilities and commitment to actions when working as an artist and not. It's a state of living in harmonic agreement with oneself. And then Rubin adds, not all projects take time, but they do take a lifetime. My own view, and this is me, my own view is that the kind of integration and deeply invested intention that Rubin talks about are at the heart of the various creative projects and initiatives that Sheila Butler has taken on in her professional life, and which I've been very fortunate to have access to over many years and to learn from. The foregoing ideas about intention and integration notwithstanding, it would be misleading to suggest that Sheila has not had an articulated way of thinking about how being an artist maker operates for her personally. So I want to share this brief statement she included in one of the applications that we worked on together as a group in 2013. In it, I think you'll hear Sheila's important way of owning the necessity of making one's work as an artist. This is what she wrote. For me, the mimetic aspect of drawing affects a strong connection between the image that I draw and the source for the image in the world of lived reality. The complementarity thus revealed to me never fails to appear somewhat mysterious and profound. Sheila then asks, can I go further with this? Can images be instrumental in terms of physical causality? Will they function as a way of manipulating natural forces? Can pictures make things happen? And then she says, by this I mean that pictures preform physical existence when viewers identify with pictorial spaces and images and take these identifications with them into their daily lives. Representation leaves the frame and continues to inhabit and transform living memories and imaginations. And she ends with this. This transformative power applies not only to the viewer, but to the artist as well, to the maker of the magic images whose psychic life is lived in the produced pictures. The power of drawing to describe the world appears each time to create the world, guided by the sympathetic formula where, and this is a quote from Marcel Mauss, like produces like. The part represents the whole. The opposite acts on its opposite. And then Sheila says, as if by the efficacy of magic. And she ends, drawing is a personal system of survival. I mentioned that I first came to know Sheila as my teacher. In light of the statement I just read from her and the sort of integrated and cross-pollinating approach that her practice demonstrates, I'm pressed to ask, can art be a teacher? Not in the Middle Ages, I mean now. Certainly I'm aware that in the context of contemporary art, to assert the role of art as a didactic one is for many troubling. But I'm thinking of teaching in the broadest and most culturally expansive sense. Now, as many of you know, art's role in early Western and other pre-modern contexts was heavily bound up with teaching through non-literary codes. Yet I think we could also consider the word teaching as it relates to art's work in an even more complex way, such as Jacques Rancière, and this will be brief, but such as Jacques Rancière does in his relatively well-known essay, The Ignorant Schoolmaster. I was reading this with some first-year MAs and MFAs several years ago, and in context of Rancière's extrapolating on the history of institutional and pre-institutional education in France and the Netherlands in the 1800s and before, and his wrestling with the notion of learning as a form of exchange among equals versus according to a master-student relationship, I raised with the students the provocation about art's capacity to teach, perhaps seemingly in spite of itself, and even perhaps in spite of the apparent level of so-called understanding on the part of the viewer. Can art impart knowledge, impart lessons through a language whose codes are not uniformly taught or always articulable? Can art say in culture in ways that inform us or move us without literalizing its assertions? My sense is that Sheila's statement I just read and the way she's practiced as an artist, that Sheila would argue that it can and it should. Now, this is not by Sheila, it's by Carrie James Marshall, of course. Not long after going through the work on Rancière, I went to New York along with some students I'd been discussing the writing with. And we saw a retrospective of the work of American artist Carrie James Marshall. Marshall's gallery website says the following about his practice. Carrie James Marshall uses painting, sculptural installations, collage, video, and photography to comment on the history of Black identity, both in the United States and in Western art. He's well known for paintings that focus on Black subjects historically excluded from the artistic canon, and has explored issues of race and history through imagery ranging from abstraction to comics. Marshall said in 2012 in an interview with Art and Auction that, and this is a quote, "It's possible to transcend what is perceived to be the limitations of a race-conscious kind of work." And I think he's certainly referring to so-called Western painting. "It's a limitation only if you accept someone else's foreclosure from the outside. If you plumb the depths yourself, you can exercise a good deal of creative flexibility. You're limited only by your own ability to imagine possibilities." In the Met exhibition that we saw, I was transfixed by Marshall's painterly language that portrays a deep understanding of Renaissance-inflected representational practices and strategies that invoke the pattern and decoration movement, and also from abstract expressionism, all in service to images that examine subjects in Black American history, including concerning race riots, housing inequity, and ideas and questions of beauty. It is a painting language that extends its reach in complex ways that makes the experience and potential interpretation of the works available to a wide and diverse audience. At that time and now, I think this brings Sheila Butler's approach to mind. In her exhibition, we encounter a host of representations of figures and other subjects, people, in action, in reaction, and occasionally in repose. In Pamela's talk, which you'll hear very soon, she'll draw on her essay, in part, to establish the work that Sheila's done as being invested in many things, including, I might suggest, teaching us the world, and in all of its layered complexity, its visibility and invisibility. Home stretch. At the entrance to our exhibition, there's a beautifully designed and fabricated case by Glenn Johnson showing 3 comic books in which Sheila pasted a series of amazing hand-drawn interventions, a feminist counter-narrative produced with incredible drawing skill. You can examine the comics via a set of facsimiles found on the benches in the exhibition, and their overall title is "She Takes Refuge in Dreams." These works were made in the 1990s, just as Sheila was completing the MA thesis that Blair mentioned at the Center for the Study of Theory and Criticism at Western. Now, Sheila might tell you that she did the degree in order to keep her job at Western, a master's being requisite to being a full-time faculty member, perhaps. But I would argue that the world is better when a mind like Sheila's is put to such a purpose, almost no matter the reason. Sheila's MA thesis, Psychoanalysis, Agency, and Androgyny, the work of Merit Oppenheim, is amazing. There's not time for me to dig into its importance, and I would argue its prescience. And frankly, I'd rather end very soon by giving you a little bit of time with Sheila's words in a video clip, and then turning it over to Pamela. I'm now going to wrap up my section by playing a short clip where we'll hear from the MAWA Wendy Wersch Memorial Lecture that Sheila gave on November 21st in 2004. It's just a 5-minute section that begins after some wonderful introductions by Sonia Grabowski and Bev Pike, who I see are here tonight. And there's also Sheila's gracious beginning to her talk, but unfortunately, there's some technical problems that make it hard to understand at the beginning. So we're going to begin with a brief section where Sheila just begins to talk about the kind of material of her thesis. So I'm going to see if I can do what I'm supposed to do to make this work. Oh, that's our catalog. Okay. Now, yeah. Click on where? Oh, there. Good. Okay.
I am
Oops, I'm sorry.
a major exhibition to tour.
Okay. So this is where
My
it begins.
examination revolves around the question as the full creator in 1936 of a work that has become known as, quote, a standard textbook illustration, the famous furry teacup. How could she continue to produce work that, by comparison with male surrealist colleagues, such as Max Ernst and Alberto Giacometti, go largely unnoticed until shortly before her death in 1985? I believe this question opens up the field of individual biography onto a complex social space with important implications for visual art in the 21st century. Fundamentally, my thesis examines the relationship of psychoanalytic theory to visual art. I see Merit Oppenheim as exemplary for this examination due to her personal acquaintance with C.G. Jung, as well as to her work with the founders of the Surrealist movement, whose aesthetic, as we know, directly depended on the psychoanalytic theories of Sigmund Freud. In my thesis, I construct and defend the argument that Oppenheim's reliance on Jungian theories of the self and Jung's archetype of the androgen hampered her efforts to construct her sense of self as woman artist. Key to my argument is an analysis of the day-to-day material reality of Merit Oppenheim's studio practice. That is, the relevance to questions of selfhood evidenced by her preferred methods for studio production and her selection of materials. The connection of self to materials and techniques. I see her deliberate, consistent refusal of stylistic and material unity as an issue central to her struggle to achieve a confident position of personal.
A major exhibition to tour.
Through her, I construct and defend the argument that Oppenheim's reliance on Jungian theories of the self and Jung's archetype of the androgen hampered her efforts to construct her sense of self as woman artist. Key to my argument is an analysis of the day-to-day material reality of Merit Oppenheim's studio practice. That is, the relevance to questions of selfhood evidenced by her preferred methods for studio production and her selection of materials. The connection of self to materials and techniques. I see her deliberate, consistent refusal of stylistic and material unity as an issue central to her struggle to achieve a confident position of personal agency as an artist and a woman. I would also like to talk about, as contributing factors, gendered surrealist and modernist aesthetic value systems that formed the social context for Oppenheim's work. Merritt Oppenheim was born in Sweden.
Going to leave it there. I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank Sheila for her amazing work and her friendship. And I have the privilege of turning it over to Pamela Edmonds. Thank you very much. Here.
Bonjour. Hello, friends. It's great to be here. Actually, this is actually the first time I've got an opportunity to see the show. Because of COVID, I wasn't able to travel to see the exhibition in London. So this is particularly special for me. And I'm going to be speaking about Sheila's work as an activist. As a curator, my own practice is very much interested in, as Blair was saying, the politics of representation and activist artists. And that's how I got to know Sheila and to admire her work over the many years. And so I'll be speaking to those things, as well as to many of her ideas and methodologies. And so I just want to thank everyone. I'm short, so I got to push this down. Okay, thank you. All right. All good. So I want to thank again Blair, Glenn, the School of Art Gallery team for their dedication and effort in bringing the show to life. My heartfelt thanks to the lenders as well, because that's an important part of bringing the show together, as well as my co-curator, Patrick Mann. Your insight, your collaboration has been invaluable, and it's always wonderful to work with you. So thank you so much for being of us going through this ride over many years. And of course, thank you to Sheila. It's an honor for me to be here as we celebrate your enduring contribution to the arts and your fearless engagement with social and political themes and the undeniable power of your artistic vision. And so I'm going to go to my slideshow. So let me see if I can do this. There we go. All right. From beginning, now we go. All right. Okay, so my talk tonight is called Outside of Ordinary Time. And so I'm looking at the art of Sheila Butler and the poetics of liminality. And so liminality is an idea I've been really interested in as a curator. It's these threshold spaces, these in-between spaces. So this is, you know, hallways and stairwells and the spaces between waking and dreaming. And so I'm speaking about Sheila's work in connection to these ideas. And so when we think about art as a tool of political resistance, about how art can reshape narratives that define our lives, we must recognize the contribution of artists like Sheila Butler, who compel us to reflect deeply on these ideas of poetics, of liminality and activism. And so liminality is a term that comes from anthropology, and it refers to moments of transition and ambiguity, such as psychological or physical spaces. And so when you look at her work, you're looking at how work lives in these margins between male and female and life and death and public and private. And so her work engages with all of these states between the past and the present and the future and how they come together. And she creates spaces that defy linear narratives and clear categories. This resonates with her interest in psychoanalytic theory that Patrick touched on, and how our conscious and unconscious minds shape our perceptions of ourselves and others. And so in Sheila's art, these boundaries are fluid. She blurs the line between the physical and the intangible and encourages us to explore how we can exist or thrive on these thresholds. Her work destabilizes identity and representation and invites us to spaces outside of ordinary time. So that's why I sort of touch on this idea. And so, as you'll see in the show, Sheila's art is deeply rooted in figuration, and she uses the human form in very unconventional ways. And this was during a time when abstract art and minimalism, when she was first starting out, dominated the male-centric art world. But she chose to focus on the body. Her artistic approach to the body involves a deliberate use of distortion, fragmentation, disillusion, speaking to the complexities of the human condition in ways that pure abstraction could not capture. So she draws from dreams and from the media and from the unconscious. Her work creates narratives that blur the line between the real and the surreal. And so Suzie and Patrick talked about her early studies, where she was one of the few women in a male-dominated field. And so she really got sensitized to issues around feminism and gender equality in the art world. And this was also what I was really interested in as a curator. With her formative art lessons and sketching live models, Sheila became deeply attuned to both the figurative and metaphysical aspects of the human condition. And this background laid the groundwork for her lifelong inquiry into how art can serve as a form of commentary on life's complexities and the lived experience of women in particular, particularly the societal constraints and expectations of women. And so I'm going to go to the first slide here. So essential tremor. This is a central work in the show. Patrick also showed it as well, and we thought this was an important piece to have in the exhibition. It comprises over 70 feet of transparent light brown fabric draped across the gallery, resembling a skin-like veil. On this permeable surface, we encounter sleeping heads, arms, and hands rendered in trembling lines, both bold and delicate. These figures exist in a state of suspension, caught in the tension between presence and absence. And this is one of the first actually this was the first work I saw of Sheila's in 2005 in Toronto during its exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art there in 2005 in a show called Just My Imagination, which was a group show about experimental drawing. And I was immediately struck by the work's rawness and this awkward beauty, which I found very puzzling and really transfixed by. And it expanded my own understanding of what drawing could be, how it could transcend the page and become something alive, something that exists in the space between the viewer and the artwork. And in the original installation, the work was accompanied by a wall drawing of falling male bodies, images of manicured women, and pasted rubber gloves. I remember them being on the wall, along with a text that described a disturbing dream. And what's fascinating is how Sheila subverts traditional figure-ground relationships. So these peculiar bodies appear and disappear as expressive forms of transforming energy, but they're not realistic portraits of individual characters. And I first met Sheila in 2005, that same year, when I was working at A Space Gallery as a program coordinator, and Sheila was on the board of directors. And I was immediately struck by her commitment to social and political activism. And A Space is one of the earliest artist-run centers in Canada, long established for social practice art. And I was an emerging curator and passionate about art's role in community building. And Sheila was always brought so much to our meetings, very candid. We loved, your humor and your sensitivity to the type of work that we wanted to do to bring inclusivity and activism to the space. And so I had the privilege of curating Sheila's exhibition, which Patrick mentioned, in a show called Passages with Lucy Chan at the Art Gallery Peterborough, where I was a curator. And it focused on drawing installations that dealt with psychological narratives. And so Sheila's work explored ideas of sanctuary and shelter. This was a painted greenhouse that she had in the space. Do you remember that? It was a beautiful exhibition that had, in which she placed image drawings inside of this shelter space. And it was a really incredible exhibition that I really enjoyed working on. And so Sheila, as others mentioned, works in so many different mediums, but this personal system of survival she thinks about in drawing was something I was very drawn to, saying that activism and drawing were two mainstays in her practice. And she thinks about also how we look at bodies, right? How we assign values to them, how we understand each other within systemic inequality, and how this relates to gender, race, and class. And so paintings like Bearing in Mind You Could Die Today from 1999 doesn't offer neat conclusions. Here we encounter this haunting diptych where figures circle around a hazy pool of light, which has been likened to a television screen caught between channels. Through this work, we understand the power of art to communicate the intangible, our repressed fears, our desires, the complexities that reside within all of us, and to embrace these uncertainties as part of our existence. What's fascinating is how Sheila subverts traditional, I think I said that already, sorry. And so this other work, Poolside, portrays the chaos of an impending gun shooting through a series of tangled animated stills. Sheila delves into these themes of violence, social conflict with a raw and unflinching gaze, but also with a profound sense of empathy, capturing the tension between survival and mortality. Here she includes the recurrent figure of the swimmer, who symbolizes the unconscious mind's journey into the depths of the self and the unknown. She uses the pool as a motif, which is also significant because pools symbolize spaces of leisure and escape, but here they become sites of tension and disquiet. The figures are not simply swimming, they are caught in a struggle, grappling with unseen forces. The pool becomes a metaphor for the mind, another space where boundaries are blurred. In Female Icarus, we see how Sheila's work touches on issues around feminism, but she doesn't present them, I think, in a sort of didactic way. Her work aligns, for me, what Black feminist critic Bell Hooks calls an oppositional gaze. So for Hooks, looking is an act of defiance, a way of resisting passive consumption and reclaiming agency. And so in Female Icarus, she reimagines this mythological figure not as a tragic hero who falls to his death, but as a woman who survives her descent and with the aid of a parachute emerges transformed. In Ophelia, Sheila revisits the tragic figure from Shakespeare's play, subverting the familiar image of the tragic drowning woman. The disembodied hand here suggests an intervention and protection, a breaking of the narrative that confines Ophelia to a fate of passive suffering. In Leap and Fall and Testing New Waters, figures appear floating and submerged in between moments of tension and release. Formal techniques like her use of sharp, repeated lines and vivid colors, such as the warm reds and cool blues here in these paintings, create a jarring dissonance. The subject seems suspended, caught in the act of movement itself between states of being. For me, these works are particularly evocative in their ability to elicit a sense of vulnerability. The figures appear weightless, seemingly at the mercy of unseen currents that threaten to pull them in opposite directions. Other subjects are positioned on stairs, caught in interstitial spaces between safety and danger. In Fire, a lone figure stands in a stairwell, appearing distressed as red flames flicker at the edge of the image. In Escape, another figure moves as in flight, caught between security and disaster, in a moment of crisis where the outcome remains uncertain. In early works, like the paired paintings, which I don't have, but they're in the show, White Walker and Black Walker, frontal figures stand precariously balanced on invisible tight ropes as swimmers move beneath and around them. In Strike and Electric, Sheila introduces imagery of lightning to reveal figures struck by external forces, caught in moments of shock and revelation. Lightning here is a metaphor for the unexpected and uncontrollable elements that shape human existence, highlighting both precarity and power. In Blown Away, this is a work that came later in Sheila's practice when she switched from oil to acrylic due to a lack of a properly vented studio. And she began to incorporate everyday objects like drink tickets and dice and plastic tags into her work. So these objects are like the discarded remnants of daily life that we often overlook, but they carry their own stories, and she reimagines them in these works. And so with Blown Away, she takes a picture book cover and juxtaposes it with an image blown out of its original context. Here we see disembodied subjects in free fall, suspended in a state of violent motion. The painting conveys a sense of explosive energy, as if an unseen force suddenly disrupted the stability of the world within the canvas. Figures are shown tumbling through space, their bodies twisted and contorted, emphasizing the uncontrollable nature of their descent. Fragmented arms and legs are depicted, as also is the figure's wincing face, giving the impressions of bodies caught in the throes of disintegration. The scene also evokes a sense of vulnerability, again, and powerlessness, with the falling bodies embodying a loss of control and unpredictability. The use of scale within the painting intensifies the drama. Some figures appear larger and closer, drawing us as viewers into the immediacy of their plight, while others recede into the background. These figures embody, at the same time, though, a resilience, a potential for transformation. As we continue to grapple with the long-term impact of other circumstances, I think the show really does connect to our current world, to I think, what we're grappling in a post-COVID world. Her work reminds us of the power of art to transcend the ordinary, to capture the fleeting moments that define our existence. So I encourage you to look closely, to allow yourself to be unsettled by these works, to be moved and transformed by them. And in closing, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to Sheila for her visionary work, for her unwavering commitment to exploring the human condition the way that you do. Your work continues to inspire and reflect us to reflect, transform, and find meaning in the ever-changing landscapes of our lives. So thank you. This is my thank you slide.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers for your fascinating insights. And again, thank you so much to Sheila for giving us so much beautiful work and complex work to think about. It's really so special. So I think we have time for a couple of questions. And maybe I would just turn it over to the audience if anybody here has any questions to ask. If not, I have prepped ones. Yeah. I think so. Okay.
Well, first off, thank you all so much. Just wow. What a great way to introduce us to such a exceptional artist in person. I would say also as a person as well. I guess my question for you guys, looking at Sheila's work and how it's so complex now. I think it's always been complex, but especially now when we're talking about activism in work and practice because there's more access to the world. How would you maybe discuss how to emerging artists incorporating activism in the work and how to be brave, but also to be truthful and humble and to really be an ally in some situations, but also putting your foot out there? Because I think some emerging artists, they want to talk or be involved in these discussions or involve them in their work, but they're afraid of overstepping or getting it wrong. But what would you say to emerging artists in that way, reflecting on Sheila's work?
Yeah, no, it does make. I think I had an artist say to me, Sheila, that you taught them how to be brave. And I think as an artist, you have to be fearless. So you can't, I think, as an emerging artist, censor yourself. Just be authentic to your vision. And I think you have to be that antenna, right? You have to sort of understand the world that you're in and think beyond it and not let external things kind of get in your way. And then, I think you have to understand that as an artist, we are, the speakers of our moment. And so if you don't censor yourself, if you have the bravery that, and like Sheila, you talk about how you worked with the figure at a time where artists were working with abstraction and, it wasn't the flavor of the day necessarily, but you have to be authentic to your own vision and voice. And so I think if you do that, then it reads true.
Yeah, I would pick up on that and say, even in relation to what Sheila said about her sort of buy-in to art history, that she thinks of art history as a vast kind of story and not one of individuals, but something that's much bigger than that. So I would say that, yeah, we're kind of responsible to tell the stories of our day, but not to tell other people's stories. And I think that is the tension that you're talking about. So I think that there's not a recipe for this, but I think that in a sense, if you want to talk about the complexities of the world in which we live as an artist, you also need to kind of begin with yourself and think about, what's the kind of entry point, or what is the vulnerability that you yourself relate to in order to talk about some larger, questions of social justice, for example. And so, I think of Sheila's work in relation to the fact that I think she observed a lot of vulnerabilities in the world, but she found a way to actually use metaphor, use different kinds of representation that wasn't about, picturing somebody else's reality, but actually looking at a kind of inner reality of her own that was her way of processing, I don't want to speak for Sheila, but her way of kind of processing the complexity of the world.
Maybe just one last thing I'll add on to that too is maybe more like practical things. Sheila's part of a strong community that had a lot of a conversation about art. So having a good group of peers to discuss things with and being honest with each other to be able to be brave.
Are there any other questions? And if you'd like a microphone, I can run it up to you. And we also have people joining on the live stream. So if are there any questions on the live stream, Dee? Not yet. People are shy. Well, I have a question that I could pose. I asked actually my our fantastic gallery assistant, Sapphire Morose, who's a feminist figurative painter. What would you like to know? Like what questions would come to mind? So I want to just thank Sapphire for her questions. And one that I think maybe you touched on a little bit, Pamela, is, I'll just read it. Sheila noted, I guess in conversations that we've had and also in the catalog conversation that you had with Sarah Charette, you would communicate as a young child into Pittsburgh to take figure study classes at Carnegie Mellon. And looking at your work over the course of your career, it's very clear that the practice of figure study and like drawing from models is really important, and yet some of the figures that you draw, the models are holding poses that would be impossible. They're often in motion or in moments of action instead of stasis. So I guess there's like kind of a technical question about like just about rendering bodies in very complex and difficult to hold positions, and also just more broadly about the importance of motion in Butler's work.
Yeah, I think that motion comes into the work not just physically but metaphorically, like the idea of that identity is, and as human beings we're constantly in motion. We might not realize that we're constantly in this process of becoming and revealing ourselves and changing. And I think that what Sheila's work does is indicate that constant shifting of reality, right? Through, you see like the compositions they're not still compositions, they're refracting and changing, and the body is a figure, but it's not necessarily, even though Sheila knows the body well because of that, those drawing lessons and that background, but the body is a figure also for a broader idea of what we are as human beings. And so movement is part of that, to show that movement, and because the body is shaped that way, it helps to indicate that change in movement, I would say. So it's not necessarily about representing an idealistic body. It's about being able to communicate what life is, which is not clean cut.
Which
It's
is not-
messier than that.
Yeah, it's not stable. It's not stoic.
No,
It's
not
not
at
a held
all.
pose. I wonder if was that also some of the reason that you loved watching football? It's just like seeing people falling and in complicated positions. Like,
I might add that I was thinking about just teaching figure drawing. And, you know, when you do gesture drawing, you know, quick drawings of the body, your own body is moving the material around in order to describe someone else's body in motion. And so I think that some of that tradition is in Sheila's work. And I also think that, you know, sometimes if you're the teacher, you might ask the students to take the same pose as the model for a few minutes, so to feel that. And when you do that, it's about a certain physical experience, but it's also probably about a kind of empathy with what they're experiencing. And so I think those kinds of, you might call it a kind of language or syntax, I think that's in Sheila's work, but it's kind of exploded. You know, there's a way in which she's taken it so much further than a kind of academic rendering approach.
that makes sense. I think we maybe have time for like 1 or 2 more questions. Did I see a hand up in the back? Questions? Questions that you have for one another?
I feel like with that question, I was almost wanting to like quote you from a video
Yeah.
I watched of you earlier today where you were talking about kind of the movement also being from a feminist perspective. Am I saying this right? Of just kind of like women having a lot to do. Like she was raising kids, was teaching, she was trying to make work, and like there's no time to like sit around lounging like in a model pose for 10 minutes. It's like people are moving. I'm paraphrasing it in totally the wrong way, but that's what came to mind.
Well, I also would add to that, I thought Pamela's quote in the newspaper and what she said tonight about Icarus, female Icarus, is really great and a wonderful reading. And I think that it reminded me that bodies have stories. And so Ophelia's body being found in the water was a story. But it doesn't have to be the only story. And so I think that Sheila's work was often about thinking about what's the familiar story and what are the problems with the familiar story, which is often oppressive, and trying to find a way to change that narrative, but in a way that people could actually relate to. So you know, it wasn't an academic thing or a purely theoretical thing. It was something that she was asking us and is asking us to really look at and kind of understand with our own body and our own eyes.
Yeah, they have like a deeply kind of performative kind of feeling to them. Like they almost feel like film stills, but sort of layered in a way that they feel like they're kind of taking everyday circumstances and then like making them strange so that you're kind of revealing like the psychological underpinnings of very everyday experience. Yeah. Do you think that there are any particular works where, I think that there are these 2 aspects of Sheila's practice that we've discussed, a role as a community organizer and activist, and then of course like a role as a very accomplished artist and in painting, drawing, mixed media. And I'm wondering if there are any particular works where you feel like those 2 pursuits really collide, or how community activism might have influenced art practice and vice versa.
I see it in the comic books, really. I mean, that's something I think most of us, many of us, grow up with as children. And those myths that we live with in our lives that create sort of those lessons that I think that are very important about learning who we are. And so I love the idea of what Sheila does with altering those comic books, right? At a time when I think we're so used to seeing zines and other things, and they very much part of a community practice. But to take, like, what is it, Star Trek and all those sort of like, which are become like our own sort of popular cultural mythological stories in some ways, and inserting a woman's voice in there, I think is really an important part of that community engaged practice. So I love that part of what she's working on with the altered comic books and bringing in the stories of dreams again within that, but women's dreams, not just the hero's journey and this good versus evil, but like an everyday experience of a woman, artist, moving through her own world, right?
Maybe like the pragmatic dream of flying pretty close to the sun, but being like, I brought my parachute. Yeah. I'm fine. Like that there's a denouement and there's a preparedness to women's dreams, perhaps. Di, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Pat. You mentioned that Sheila used drawing as a means of survival. Is that not? Can you really elaborate? Does that really resonate with you? That I think a lot of us here. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, I do have to say I was quoting from Sheila. So I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think I would say that what she was getting at was, like in the thing that I read, that the producer, the artist, is not only kind of drawing out of themselves, but they're also drawing out of the world. And then through doing that, they're not just imaging probably a different world than they've experienced, or the world that they could manage to represent. But in doing that, then they begin to kind of live in that space in one way or another. Maybe they live in that space in order to think about the hard things that they can't think about in their lived life, or maybe it's a kind of fantasy that allows them to imagine something other than what is the real. And so I think that drawing as a means of survival is about a kind of back and forth dialogue between sort of making and then what's made becoming its own kind of reality that then you begin to actually be able to live in a particular way. And I mean, I think dreams, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, I imagine and understand that dreams work in that, some of that way of being reparative, even though they can be, they can bring up a lot of pain. So I think in a sense, Sheila was already, even before she, had done the work with psychoanalysis, was already talking about that kind of a structure, I guess you could say, of, yeah. And so, when it says the title, She Takes Refuge in Dreams, it's clearly those dreams are there to do some work that needs doing. And but then so is the drawing. And I think that's the point in Sheila's statement, that the drawing is also doing some work besides becoming a representation. It's also doing some work for the artist and for all of us in one way or another. Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, it's a little bit after 7:30, so perhaps we should go upstairs and see the exhibition, unless I'm cutting you off.
No.
Okay.
Sheila, do you want to say anything? You're good? Okay.
You're good?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So glad you could be here.